Hey, welcome back to James Take. I know it's been a while. I'm slowly upgrading my set. What do you think? Do you guys enjoy the background? I think the digital studio is far more interesting than the slightly blurry background I had before. That being said, let's dive right in. There's a lot to cover, and surprisingly, not that much. I was really interested to see that there's been a lot of discussion lately on AI acceleration or whether things should be paused. And what I see there is that the people who just want stuff paused are not really genuine in their feeling for things paused. Because when you line them up and you ask them, hey, who do you want to, see win the AI war, America or China, or for that matter, the EU, they're always like, we should have America first, accelerate first with AI, or, the EU accelerate first and win with AI over China. So you can tell that when the real priorities come out, it's very obvious that they want things to be slammed on the gas pedal as much as possible. Now, on the accelerationist viewpoint, I always find it interesting that whenever new models are not dropping, they become a doomerist, as if AI is now in a winter and everything's frozen over, which is why I really haven't been talking about AI in some time, is that when you're going a nice 90 miles per hour, you kind of forget that you're moving at 90 miles per hour because you're so used to the thrill of the acceleration from 0 to 60 that when it went from 60 to 90, you got a little dissatisfied. And now that, we're flooring it and going at 90 miles per hour, that you're really disappointed with the fact that you're not getting that kick in the pants every time, a new model drops or a new capability drops. And you really have to think, is that what AI news has just become? Is that if there isn't a new model dropping, that everything is frozen? And I find that be a fascinating thought, because in many ways it's just wrong. If you really think about how AI at present isn't even being fully used. Most people, when they're using Claude and they're using the artifact operations in Claude, it's really impressive. Or, when they're using the search functions in GPT 4.0, they find that, it's delivering more meaningful results than Google's. They haven't really thought through, well, how is AI supposed to be used? Sometimes AI is great as a chatbot, sure. And, I'm guilty of that too. Of course, I use AI as a means of bouncing ideas off of, but AI can be so much more than that. It could be deeply integrated into your company's products and services. It could be useful in making dashboards that update based off of tickets coming in. It could read those tickets, and rather than having them be manually categorized, can use intelligence to figure that out. And then alert engineers, hey, we have a surge of tickets coming from, this error message. It can be used for, follow-ups for businesses. So instead of giving the generic follow-up, that could be personalized. There's so many ways that AI used in a process can be key. And I saw this vision over a year ago with AI agents and a hierarchy that were able to work together. And I was working towards that. I'm no longer doing that. But the vision hasn't gone away. If anything, as these models have improved, we've seen interesting, almost human-like emergent qualities come out of them. And what I mean by that is if you feed an AI like a bunch of information, it tends to forget everything in the middle, and it tends to focus on what came in the beginning and at the end. And that's very human-like in the way that we remember stuff. If you give someone a book on War and Peace, they'll remember the introduction. they'll remember the ending pretty well, but the stuff in the middle, not so much. I thought that was a interesting emergent property from these large language models, given enough context size. Though that should be contrasted with the fact that if you do give these models a specific thing to focus on that is in the middle, they can expertly find that. And so that opens up a door for, well, I talked about this before, like vector databases and sharding and figuring out, the relationship between everything. And that if you give proper instructions to these models, they could really generate some really effective and useful things like checklists. They can create charts and graphs that can give you a good idea. You give them a piece of data and you ask it, hey, what are some risks or stuff? And it will be able to generate a beautiful chart. I used this with my own portfolio recently. I had a portfolio with a bunch of information on there and I fed it in. And I said, hey, based off of this data, give me a synopsis. Let me know how my investments are performing. Tell me what you project over time. Tell me if I'm being conservative or if I'm being aggressive. And the AI model with that prompt was able to generate, the most beautiful report I've ever seen. Something that I could easily convert over into an investor pitch. So AI does have that unique property to really boost businesses forward. And on that, AI is being used in lights out factories. This I saw this week, which inspired me to make this episode, because I already knew that they had AI deep integration with robotics and that they were, instead of having to use thousands and thousands of humans to train a robot, they're able to use an LLM that's using thousands of robots and it's able to learn from these mistakes. And you originally saw, Boston Dynamics robots, how they're able to move stuff from one package to another or move small cylinder objects from one thing to another. Well, we're now seeing, extremely cost-effective robots. I'm talking like $12,000 that are plugged into these large language models that are able to learn from their mistakes in real time and correct things. So they could be deployed in lights out factories. And what I mean by lights out factory, if you've never heard it before, is essentially a factory that can run without any human intervention. And this is important because, everyone's talking about reshoring manufacturing back into the United States. But what they're not telling you when they go before Congress asking for thousands and thousands of, if not millions of dollars in tax breaks, is that these factories are going to employ roughly about 0 Americans, because they're going to be filled with robots and machines. And the only Americans who may show up at that factory from time to time are going to be wearing like full-on bunny suits where, they're detected to see if even a microscopic skin cell escapes. It's not going to allow that. That's what these bunny suits, in order to do maintenance, if they need to at all, on these factories that will run near 24/7. And we see that going on in the textile industry, where it's not very well talked about, but there are completely lights out factories being built in the United States right now that are fully automated. The raw material comes in and pops out textiles at the other end. And it used to be like textile factories, you'd always go where the cheapest labor is, because if you're paying, hundreds of thousands of people pennies per garment, you go where it's cheapest. Well, now with the way technology is going, you could operate 24/7 with machines that can correct mistakes. You no longer need humans, and the cost per garment will drop even further. And it's not just textiles that are getting these lights out factories with AI. It's coming to car manufacturing, the traditional cars. Ford and all these companies are looking over at Xiaomi in China and seeing that their cars are being fully built with robots. And they're saying, why are we paying people, good union wages when we could pay nobody union wages and still make same product? which, I know that sounds terrible, but please keep in mind, I am a advocate for universal basic income because I do see as AI and the robots powered by AI take over more and more of the economy, unless you have consumers, their products will be wasted. And we see this in China too, when they have absolutely mass produced off the wazoo cars and bicycles that you can go from space and see these parcels filled with bicycles that nobody bought because there's no consumers. Well, that's where a universal basic income could come into play, in that it would create demand by people having money to spend on these things. But I'll digress from that. My focus wanted to be on that just because we're moving at 90 miles per hour doesn't mean that real substantive movements in AI are taking place. And I find, if anything, that this cruise at speed is very conducive for people to really settle down and really ground themselves in the capabilities that exist today in preparation for the capabilities that are dropping tomorrow. And what I mean by that is, way back when GPT 3.5 was around and GPT 4 was being tested, they really were thinking through on the research front about like chain of thought and chain reasoning and tree of thought. And they were incorporating these in instructions to make the AI better. Well, as models have improved since then, especially with GPT-4 and then GPT-4o, and then particularly with Claude, is they've actually baked these into the super instruction, where Claude will then be prompted. This is invisible to the user, but it'll be prompted with the research that's been created to use tree of thought and chain of thought to think through its answers, and it delivers much more meaningful and useful answers to the user. And then that gets incorporated into the next training set. And by the time the new Opus comes out, whenever that drops, it will then be a part of the LLM. So new emergent behavior could then be studied. Speaking of studying emergent behavior, this just dropped recently. In Minecraft, they put a bunch of AI agents in there, and the AI agents were interacting with each other. They were choosing jobs, and sometimes they'd have different desires. But then, for example, a farmer was farming, and it was hearing stories of an adventurer AI, and it wanted to become an adventurer, but then all the other AI started starving because there's no food, so it gave up its dreams of adventuring to go back to farming. And you could see this tribalistic integration where these AI agents are all working together to achieve a greater good than beyond what they could achieve individually. And they ended up gathering something like 66 of all Minecraft items that existed. And they were, if an AI agent got lost or got killed, the other AI agents would be concerned, and they were putting up torches to provide lights at night, so that way the other agents that might have gotten lost could find their way back. It was very interesting to see that type of emergent behavior. And that's the type of emergent behavior I was actually banking on way back in 2023, if not 2022, where you can have your CEO agent and your board of directors and replicate an organization where all the thought process, all the stuff that needs to be considered can be done. And, back then we were dealing with context window limits, and we're also dealing with AI that would forget often and then hallucinate answers. And it was a difficult problem to solve without much larger context windows. But we're getting those now. The GPUs are getting there. We're still massively under compute with where people want AI to be. And that's just because our power grids are actually being a huge problem to why we probably don't have much bigger advancements in AI. In that when you have 200, 300,000 H100 GPUs all start up at once and then shut down at once and move up and move down, you can see the power grid jump up and down and up and down. And power grids, they're not that responsive. So the data centers have to account for that, and it's just mind-boggling how much power this consumes. And say what you will about Sam Altman, he really did hit the nail on the head when it comes to the amount of power that's going to be needed, despite the models getting cheaper. It's ludicrous amounts of power that needs to be delivered, and how we're going to solve that is really, really interesting. It makes you wonder if nuclear may be on the table in a couple of years, once we realize like how absolutely mind bonkers power we're going to need in order to stay ahead. So I will hit you guys up in the next episode of James Take. I will catch you guys next time.